wonderful people. In this video today, I wanted to talk about being an ambulatory wheelchair user. An ambulatory wheelchair user is someone who uses a wheelchair sometimes and not at other times. Some days they may need the wheelchair and other days they may not need it. They may need the wheelchair to walk long distances, but not short distances. Being an ambulatory wheelchair user is basically being a part-time wheelchair user, using it when you need it. Ambulatory wheelchair users often have a dynamic disability, which is a disability that can fluctuate. It can be from day to day or even hour to hour. I am an ambulatory wheelchair user. I started using a wheelchair around a month ago, and 1/3 of wheelchair users in the UK are ambulatory wheelchair users. Sadly, there is a lot of misunderstanding about ambulatory wheelchair use. Some people think that we're faking because sometimes we need the wheelchair and other times we don't. We can face a lot of discrimination due to this. There's a big stereotype about wheelchair users. People think that, well, if you're a wheelchair user, it must mean you use it all the time, but that's not necessarily true because disabilities can fluctuate depending on what your condition is, and wheelchairs are used for other reasons other than leg paralysis. They're used for many reasons. For example, the main reason I use it is muscle weakness. Muscle weakness is not paralysis. I can walk short distances, but I struggle with long distances. So if I'm going to the supermarket, the shopping centre, or going around the town, I use a wheelchair. If I'm going around the house, I don't need a wheelchair. But it is weird because I do get strange looks because some places are inaccessible. For example, I was going around London and there were steps to go down to the place that I wanted to go. So I did get up out the wheelchair and walk down the steps, and people must think that's really weird. People will look at you like you're faking if you do that, but I can walk short distances. Those steps are a short distance, but I need the wheelchair for the rest of the journey because going around London is a very long journey and I'm unable to walk a long distance. So people give us weird looks thinking, oh, you must be faking if you can walk a short distance, but that's not true at all, because just walking a short distance, like down a flight of stairs, is not the same as walking all the way around a town or all the way around a supermarket. Other reasons that people may use a wheelchair include collapsing or, dropping to the floor. People might have tics that require them to use a wheelchair because they may tick and drop to the floor, and that can be dangerous. It can cause some horrible injuries, so people may use a wheelchair due to that. People may also use a wheelchair due to heart issues. If their heart goes too fast, they may get very lightheaded. People may need to use a wheelchair due to that. Walking may cause their heart rate or blood pressure to dangerously elevate, so people may need a wheelchair due to that. Some people experience breathing issues, and walking may take so much effort on the body that they may need to conserve their energy. Walking long distances may lead to severe breathlessness in some people, so they may need a wheelchair due to that to prevent the breathlessness. Some people may need a wheelchair due to chronic pain. Walking may be too painful for some people, so they may need the wheelchair to make going out less painful and less excruciating for them. Some people will need a wheelchair due to issues with energy conservation. They may have very severe fatigue and walking may be too difficult for them. They may need to conserve their energy to prevent feeling absolutely exhausted and so weak that they feel like they can hardly move. There are many reasons why a person may need a wheelchair. Muscle weakness is my main reason, but I also have other reasons. I do have issues with elevated heart rate and elevated blood pressure. I do have issues with breathing due to the muscle weakness. And I do have issues with fatigue. So for me, I use a wheelchair because sometimes walking long distances for me, it takes too much of a toll on my whole body. I get weak with muscle weakness. I feel like I can't breathe properly. My heart goes too fast. My blood pressure gets too high or sometimes too low. And, it's just not great. So I do need the wheelchair. Some people think that, being a wheelchair user is giving up, but that's very ableist to say, because it's not. It's just something we need to help us get through our daily lives. And as well as this, some people think that a wheelchair is a burden or a tragedy, but to me, it has given me freedom. Before I got the wheelchair, I just wasn't able to go out on those severe symptom days, but thankfully now it has given me more freedom to go out even when I am experiencing those symptoms, which is actually really helpful, because when I'm feeling that bad, it really helps to get fresh air and go out and do stuff. It makes me feel like I'm still being included in things. So the wheelchair is definitely very beneficial to me, and I don't see it as a tragedy at all. I do see my symptoms as a bit of a tragedy. I don't like having them, but I can't get rid of the symptoms right now, so I just have to manage them, and the way to manage them for me is to use the wheelchair. Examples of dynamic disabilities that may present differently every day, include functional neurological disorder. People may experience leg paralysis some days and not other days. Pandas and pans. Some people with pandas and pans require a wheelchair, and that can get worse during flares. Multiple sclerosis can relapse and remit unless it's a progressive case, but people may need it when they are in a relapse. Thankfully, when I'm out in my wheelchair, most people are understanding. There's the breathlessness. Most people are understanding, but unfortunately, I have had some stranger looks from older people. They're not trying to be rude or anything, but I think it's because people sort of think of wheelchair users usually as older, and especially as sometimes I've had a blanket over me whilst I'm in the wheelchair, I think people think that's more associated with older people. So the people who are seniors, like 60 plus, tend to look either really concerned or really confused when I use the wheelchair. But people can be disabled at any age. They can be disabled as children, teenagers, young adults, and beyond. Any age you can be disabled. As well as this, as I said, disabilities can change over time. So just because someone walked a long distance one day doesn't mean they can do it the next day. And just because they're in a wheelchair one day and not another day, that doesn't mean that they're faking. For example, one day I was in a wheelchair pretty much the whole day. The next day I walked 2 miles. It really can change that quickly. I think that ambulatory wheelchair users are so misunderstood because, wheelchair users are often seen and assumed to be permanent wheelchair users or long-term wheelchair users. I just know that in the media, it's usually that people in a wheelchair are always in a wheelchair, but that's not necessarily the reality for everyone. So there are a lot of us that have this situation where sometimes we use it and sometimes we don't. And that needs to be understood more because we can't have people assuming we're faking. We can't have people being rude to us because they don't think we really need it, because we do. It depends on the day and how our symptoms are presenting, or the situation, how far we're expected to go on a single day. We do need it. We wouldn't have it if we didn't need it. A lot of people who use wheelchairs can stand, but just because they can stand doesn't mean they can walk. And just because they can walk short distances doesn't mean that they can walk long distances. We really need to stop making assumptions. We really need to stop thinking that we know disabled people better than they know themselves. So how do we raise awareness of ambulatory wheelchair use so that we are less judged and less discriminated against? I think the answer is the media. I think it would be amazing if there were more TV shows where there were wheelchair users who some days can walk, some days cannot, and use the wheelchairs only in certain situations. I think that would really help people understand it, because then it becomes normalised in people's minds that ambulatory wheelchair users exist. Because I think a lot of people do take their knowledge of disability from the media, but the media a lot of the time works off of stereotypes which are not always accurate. By the way, these marks under my mouth, I don't have food around my mouth. This is a dry skin thing.